Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Educational Assessment. This is episode 13, Tracking and Analyzing Results with Professor DeNobile. I am your host, Professor DeNobile. This is the first of module 4. We're almost done. We only got like 2 or 3 more weeks left. Let's get this done. Let's put it all together right now. So our agenda today, we're going to look at an overview of data in a general sense. Then we're also going to look at data usage, data types, patterns and trends in data, and summary. I hope this is a quick presentation, but you know me, sometimes I get caught up. So here we go. So we got to start with No Child Left Behind. Why do we have to start with No Child Left Behind? Because No Child Left Behind made data ubiquitous, meaning widespread everywhere. Data has been around in the educational field, as we've seen in previous lessons, for decades, if not over a century at this point. But what happened with No Child Left Behind is that No Child Left Behind aligned data with funding, meaning that each individual school, each individual classroom needs to have certain benchmark data in order to justify funding to those individual schools. So we now see data to the point that data has now become a business, and we call it big data. So data is its own industry now, especially in the field of education, because of No Child Left Behind. So what do we use assessment data for? We use it for student placement. Think of student placement as the classes in which that they're going to take. So for example, we use student placement data to determine the setup of special education classes beyond the IEP. We use assessment data to determine honors classes. In some schools that still do it, tracking, meaning that we put students on different tracks based off of their assessment data. We also use assessment data to place them into different programs, whether that be after school programs or in school programs. We also use assessment data for differentiation instruction, meaning we configure our student groupings. At my job, I do this every day. I'm supposed to be looking at daily data in order to determine the groupings in which I'm going to put my students in for my following lesson. We also do this to individualize our learning. So for example, if we give an assessment and we analyze the data for that particular assessment, we're going to look how each individual student did on that assessment to then determine for a follow-up lesson if we have to reteach certain students, if we have to allow students more practice, or maybe you have a group of students who are excelling and don't need to be retaught. And so we're going to give them a challenging assignment in the follow-up lesson. And it's also to challenge excelling students and also to challenge students in general. Let's say you give an assessment and it was an honest assessment. You aligned it to the standards, you did everything that you were supposed to do, and all of the students not only passed, but let's say they passed with an 80 or above. Well, that's going to tell you that you didn't write the test in such a way that it was going to be rigorous and challenging. That's why the Hess rigor matrix is important. Examine strengths and areas of improvement of students and teaching. Notice I don't say weaknesses here. A lot of this has to do with growth mindset. So in terms of growth mindset, if you guys remember with the types of feedback that I often give you on your assignments, I do glows and grows. We don't say, glows and dimness or something like that. And it may seem like we're playing with words, but it has a lot to do with the fact of there's a difference between saying a weakness and an area of improvement. There's a difference between saying what you did wrong and ways in which you can grow the next time around. Again, it may seem like we're playing with words. It may seem like, we're trying to just make you feel better about yourself, but studies show that growth mindset actually Areas of improvement, for example, double or triple the second time around, because you're talking about growth and not saying, well, you just can't do this. Determine teacher and school district effectiveness. So we can use data, for example, on standardized exams to compare individual teachers, to compare individual schools and school districts, for better or for worse. Like that's what a lot of it is. So for example, and I'm going to twist it into a positive, because oftentimes when we talk about like teacher effectiveness based off of the standardized exam, I think what it really is, if we want to be honest with ourselves, let's say we're in an elementary school and we notice that a particular teacher, let's say the teacher's in third grade, 3 years in a row, the students have not improved in their test scores 3 years in a row. Maybe it's that teacher shouldn't be in third grade. Maybe that teacher's better off in fifth grade. Maybe that teacher knows the curriculum better in fifth grade. And just like we determine student placement, we could also use it to determine teacher placement. Unfortunately, as many of you may know, oftentimes, instead of determining teacher placement, oftentimes it's like determining teacher employment, which I personally don't think that's a good use of data, but that's neither here nor there. So data is quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative deals with numbers, qualitative deals with words. We've actually done this before in a previous lesson. So we have discrete quantitative data, which includes the number of students in a class, days in a month, the number of students in a school. We have continuous quantitative data, height, weight, salary, temperature, interest rates, length of leafs, time in a race. And as you can tell, discrete data doesn't tend to fluctuate too much. Continuous data can change a lot over time. Qualitative data, we have nominal data such as gender, hair color, cities, places visited. These are like categorical data. We have ordinal data, ranking of a race, person's satisfaction, customer rating, class difficulty. Think of ordinal order, putting things in categories. And then we have binary data. Binary data is data in which there are only two outcomes based off of the data. So yes or no, true or false, ones and zeros, that we can convert the data into a binary set on the other end. So how can we make reliable inferences? Now, if you remember from one of our early modules, assessment needs to be purposeful. So there needs to be a reason as to why you're providing that assessment. You can't just give an assessment for no reason, and you can't give an assessment that's not aligned to the standards. So this is just to harken back to the group test assignment, the creating your own assessment. This is why it's important to understand what the exact standard is, so that you're creating questions directly related to that standard. And the standard that you should be using are what we call the power standards. They're the main standards. You're not going to be testing on a supporting standard, for example, because a supporting standard helps bolster the power standard. So the assessment needs to be purposeful. It needs to be aligned to the curriculum, which is the standards, in order for it to be a purposeful assessment. It also needs to be valid. It needs to measure what you intended to measure, which is the standard. So valid in the sense of if you're saying we're going to measure X, the question shouldn't be measuring Y. That's what we mean by valid. And we need multiple forms of evidence so we can triangulate our data. What does that exactly mean? So if we're going to determine whether or not students mastered a specific skill, we're not going to use one form of evidence in order to determine that. That's why it's important to know the different types of questions, because the different types of questions allow you different ways in which to measure it. I know oftentimes being an English teacher, we often fall into the trap of using writing as our means of figuring out whether or not students had mastered the standards, especially since a lot of the standards deal with reading and then analyzing that reading. But this is why it's important to know how to write really effective multiple choice, true, false, fill in the blank questions, because we need to have quantitative and qualitative data in order to triangulate it to see whether or not students have mastered the particular standards. If you remember, one of the previous modules, I kept on saying on every single slide, if it's a multiple choice question, you should be able to uh, pick out a specific standard that you are measuring in that specific question, and not simply saying this test is measuring these four standards. Well, I want to know what standard is question one measuring, because if I know what question one is measuring, I can then analyze it on the other end to determine if students met the standards for that particular on that particular test. And then if I have a writing portion, I can then triangulate my quantitative and qualitative data to make a better inference, a more reliable inference on whether or not my assessment had indeed measured what I intended to measure. So what's the point in looking at data? Well, we're going to be looking for patterns and trends. This is the reason why we analyze data. The reason why we analyze it is because we want to see over time, are we seeing improvement or the other way? So, for example, these are attendance rates from 2019 to 2020 compared to September 2020. So already when I'm looking at this title, I'm noticing that this is the pandemic started in March 2020 and September 2020 in many school districts, such as my own. Some school districts were still either still going remote. My school was still remote as of September 2020, or students went back. So we're comparing, this is the average rate of the whole school year with just September 2020. So what are we noticing? For all students, we saw a downward trend in attendance. In this particular school, it doesn't tell me which school that it was. So this could be a school district or it could be one particular school. The attendance rate went from about 95% to 93%. Well, that doesn't seem like a lot, but when we break it down into individual categories, we're going to see. So, for example, for Black or African American students, went from 94% to 90%. That's a big drop, 4%, 4 percentage points. For our Hispanic and Latino students, it went from 94% to 90%, or 89%, I should say. That's a big drop. For white students, interesting, it went from 95% to 96%. I'm starting to ask questions. Why, what happened here with white students? Was it that there were more students? Was there a larger white student population? I'm starting to ask questions from there. My high needs students went from 94% to 90%. I'm not liking that because that means I lost 4% of my high needs students. Interesting. My non-high students went from 96 to 97%. Interesting that my non-high needs students went up, but my high needs students went down. My free and reduced lunch, for those of you who don't know what free and reduced lunch, these are students who qualify for free and reduced lunch because of their socioeconomic status. So we went from 93% to 89%. That's not looking good in the sense of I need to do outreach here as well. My English language learners went from 94% to 88%. Oh man, I need to figure out why my L students went down in their attendance. My students with disabilities, they went down as well, 93% to 90%. And then here, students experiencing homelessness went from 89% to 80%. That's a huge drop. And I'm guessing it's because we went remote And because they're homeless, they probably didn't have access to technology. So these are just some things that I'm questioning while I'm looking at my patterns and trends. Reported cases of bullying. This says Ministry of Education, so I'm assuming that this is not United States data, but still, I'm seeing an upward trend in bullying. We got to address this. From 2013 to 2019, we went from about 200 cases per thousand and went up to over 600 cases per thousand. We need to put a program in to see. Here's the point of looking at the patterns and trends. I am now making a decision because I'm seeing a vast increase in bullying cases. I now, whether I'm a teacher or an administrator, I now have to decide in my classroom or in my school to make an informed decision. We're seeing an increase in bullying, so we need to put a bullying awareness program in our school. A lot of schools now have these online platforms, which are amazing because I remember when I first started teaching, I had a paper grade book. And I'm not that old. I've been teaching for 16 years now. But in the early 2000s, there weren't that many online databases, online grade books. So I had a paper grade book, and I was calculating everything by hand in my paper grade book. But what's nice about these online databases now is that they can store your data, and you can look at trends in your data. They color code them, so you can immediately see who needs help. So, for example, if we look at this, John Steinbeck is clearly not doing his work. You know, he's probably writing too many novels at home, and he needs to figure things out. Meanwhile, Charles Dickens, yeah, he's squeaking by. He's squeaking by, but he's doing his work. He's doing what he needs to do. That Emily Dickinson, though, look, she has 96% and she has an IEP. So I'm kind of curious what is going on here with Emily Dickinson, because she's doing everything that she needs to do. Meanwhile, George Orwell, clearly I need to look into his IEP to see what's going on here. Now, I just want to be mindful of one thing. GPA does not necessarily measure a student's ability level. We need to understand that GPA is not necessarily a measure of student ability, as individual teachers will interpret grading policies differently. With that said, if these are your grades, then this is informing you as an individual teacher based on your understanding of the grading policy. So I just wanted to point that out to you, that GPA is not necessarily a measure of student ability, because there are whole other factors that are involved. But with that said, as an individual teacher, you could use this data to help inform you, because all you have are your grades. Then we have some of these more qualitative data. Here's like a feelings tracker. This is for like social emotional learning. iReady. This is an iReady tracker to keep our data in order. Here, this is This is an early learning assessment. This is looking at social foundations, language, and literacy. And these are different ways. These are like running records. And keeping these running records really gives us data on the progress of individual students. We did portfolios. The whole point of looking at portfolios here is, what can these portfolios give us in terms of data? I know the easiest way of looking at some of this portfolio data is, typically speaking, portfolios, if they're done right, they're aligned to standards, and those individual artifacts can demonstrate whether or not a student has met or is meeting, um, meaning approaching a particular standard. And so this is ways that we can have concrete evidence in order to support progress, is student progress. So, in summary, we collect, we organize, we analyze, we interpret, we reflect on data. We look at growth, trends, and patterns in order to act on that data. So, we act for grouping students, for placing students, for individualizing instruction, and to challenge students. And data driven instruction, which all of this is known as, this is what data driven instruction is. Data driven instruction means using data to drive our instruction. And it's another example as to how assessment drives instruction. Because what we're doing is we're taking assessment data in order to drive our individual instruction. I thought that was a pretty quick lecture. I'm going to upload this one, and then I'm going to do the next module right now to get it out there, to get it done. I hope you guys are doing well, and I'll talk to you soon.